Oh, I started the recording. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome all of you for our very first R10 talk today with us, IEEE Region 10. And today it is our pleasure to have a speaker from Engineers Australia. If I pronounce this wrong, please tell me. We have Jane MacMaster with us today with the talk on the topic changing the narrative, the role of engineering organizations in supporting women in STEM. And for our speaker, Jane MacMaster, she has worked as an aerospace, mechanical, and system design engineer in Australia and internationally, focusing primarily on supersonic flight, vehicle design, operation research, and rapid prototyping, like every cool things that we can think about it. And also the strategies in the defense and public policy sector. She has previously worked as a senior advisor within the strategy units of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet prior to becoming chief engineer at Engineers Australia. She has also developed a generalized approach for complex problem solving, which she taught at universities across all faculties and to staff from Commonwealth and state and territory governments departments. She's a director on the board of the Australian Councils of Profession. So this is the short biography for our speaker today. It's very interesting, and I hope all of us here will enjoy Jane's talk. And for me today, my name is Kanita Dongjamgan. I will be your moderator for the IEEE R10Talk webinar today. And before we moving on to our speaker, I would like to invite Professor Lance to give the welcome address for today's talk, please.
Okay, Kanita. Thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, thank you again, Jen, for accepting our invitation to give us a speak. As a matter of fact, well, I have heard Jen speak last year in Monash University, the IEEE and ILS. And well, she was one of those among the other eminent speakers. And I was really impressed with her sharing of the story. And also, it's really encouraging, well, for our young engineers and WIEs as well. Also, first of all, I take this opportunity to welcome all our participants as well. So for those of you who are here for the first time, as a matter of fact, Region 10 Talk is not the first time we run. We've been running this in the last 2 years. So this is a joint endeavor of a couple of our committees, including the industry relations committees. We have the professional activities committees, the young professional committees, and women in engineering committees, the student activities committees, live members committees, and the humanitarian technology committees. So we run the regular talks and we invite, well, the distinguished speakers, just like Jan, MacMaster, and also from the other part of the world. So the title of the talk today is Changing the Narratives at the Role of Engineering Organizations, well, in supporting women in STEM. And obviously, well, Jan's organization, Engineering Australia, is a national engineering organization in Australia. Well, whereas, well, IEEE, we also have a close working relationship with EA. Well, we ourselves is the the largest technical and professional organization. As Jen has mentioned earlier on, right now in the panel, well, among the delegates, we have people from different parts of Asia Pacific region as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Jen, and thank you so much again, well, for your presence. Thank you.
Professor Lance, thank you. And Kanita, thank you so much for the very kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here this evening as it is on the east coast of Australia, but I understand we have people tuning in from all over the Asia Pacific. So thank you for making the time to come today, wherever you are in the Asia Pacific. And I hope it's not too early or too late where you are. I am going to share screen now. So hopefully I'll put it into slide share mode. Okay. Now, Kanita, can you see the slide?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let me see if I can do that again. Please do shout out if it turns up. There might be, that might look like it's a bit more.
Oh, good. Now we can see the slide now.
Oh, good. Okay, let's see if I can change that. So tonight I'm going to be talking about women in STEM, and in particular the E in STEM engineering, and some reflections on leadership, women in leadership in engineering as well. Did the slide change there? Yes, okay, wonderful. I am from Australia, as I mentioned, and Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia. I am on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people this evening, which is just near Canberra in the southeast corner of Australia. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of those peoples. As Professor Lance said, I work for Engineers Australia, the national professional body for the engineering profession in Australia. Our purpose is to advance the science and practice of engineering for the benefit of the community. And probably very similar to IEEE, we undertake a range of functions and activities to support the engineering profession in Australia. And in my capacity as chief engineer, I play a role in many of the functions and activities that you see on this slide here, but with a particular focus and emphasis on upholding professional standards and really encouraging our profession to remain leading edge and current and relevant, because as we all know, technology and systems are accelerating their pace of evolution. It's a very exciting time to be an engineer, isn't it? So today I thought I would touch on two broad topics. One is women in engineering, and particularly drawing on some of the insights from our women in engineering research that we released last year. And the second part is going to be more of a personal reflection on my career and some of the observations that I have observed over my career as a woman in engineering, often in quite male-dominated industries. So I've got a few observations for you to share with you this evening on that. But first, let's start with some insights from the Women in Engineering research that we undertook and released last year. The reason we undertook this research is because not many engineers in Australia are women. In fact, we've just processed the 2021 census data, and I think that's coming up. This is the report that we released. You can see the web link there if you're interested in having a read. I know that there are some countries in the world where the proportion of women in the engineering workforce is higher. In Australia, it's quite low, and I'm going to show you some of those statistics now. So this is based on our 2021 census data, where the Australian government surveyed the whole population in Australia. This only happens every 5 years. So it's quite important data for us because we haven't had an update to this data since 2016. Now we know that around 16% of qualified engineers in Australia are female, and that's up from around 14% 5 years ago. So we are moving in the right direction, but it is happening very slowly. Really interestingly, and this statistic surprised me a lot, of all the female qualified engineers in Australia, 76% of them were born overseas. Australia has relied a lot on our skilled migrant engineers coming into Australia, and that continues to be the case. We do not have many Australian people born in Australia, young Australians, choosing to study engineering, and we wanted to understand why, which was the purpose of our research, so that we could inform and design initiatives to encourage more women, more young Australian females to choose to study engineering. But just to provide a little bit more context, 17.7, that's quite specific, isn't it? Around 18% of engineering graduates are female, and slightly higher in terms of enrolments. And in terms of the number of engineers working in engineering occupations, 14% of the engineering workforce are women. And that is up from about 11 or 12% from 5 years ago. So again, it's increasing, but not at the rate that we would like it to. So we undertook this research. We surveyed hundreds of women who had chosen to study engineering, and we surveyed hundreds of women who didn't choose to study engineering. They'd chosen other fields such as architecture, science, medicine, economics, law, and so forth. And we also surveyed hundreds of men, both who had chosen engineering again, and hundreds of men who hadn't chosen engineering. They'd chosen other fields. And we surveyed both genders to understand if there are any differences between the genders. And we were really asking questions to try and understand what was it that influenced or encouraged those people to either choose engineering or not choose engineering. And I'm going to share some of those insights with you now. The most important insight for me, and the most surprising one, was that of all the women who didn't choose engineering, so they chose other fields such as science, architecture, law, economics, medicine, and so forth, 90% of those women either didn't consider engineering at all or only barely considered it, just for a brief moment before, casting it aside. And interestingly, the most common reason cited for not choosing engineering was really just a lack of awareness of what engineering is and what engineers did. And we've had that as a hypothesis for a long time, but the data from our research really supported this as the #1 reason why more women don't choose to study engineering. So while it wasn't terribly surprising, although the 90% being as high as it was, I found a little surprising, we now know categorically one of the main things that we need to do in Australia, at least, is to raise the awareness of what engineering is and what engineers do, not just with female school students, but also with the general community who are parents and teachers and careers advisors as well. So I'm sure this is not the case in many of the countries represented here tonight, but in Australia, for probably many reasons, the engineering profession is not well understood here. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. First, in Australia, Australians don't really engage with engineers very often in the same way that they engage with teachers, perhaps, or doctors or dentists who they go and visit. They have direct interactions with those sorts of professions. But engineers are sort of one link removed, aren't they? We all engage with the work of engineers almost every minute of every day, but we don't really engage with engineers themselves. And so they're a little bit more removed, I think, from everyone's daily lives. I think the second main reason that Australians don't have a very high level of awareness of what engineering is because our profession is so broad. There are almost a limitlessly long list of types of engineers that you can be these days, and new ones are emerging all the time. And we know that there are many different role types within the engineering profession. You can be a designer or a planner or a maintenance engineer or an operations engineer or a risk management engineer or a cost engineer. You can be looking at commissioning, decommissioning, test, modeling and simulation. Again, the list is very long. And so it's very difficult for our profession to try and articulate what it is that engineers do, because actually there's so many different types of us. It's hard to put into one sentence. And so the challenge we have, at least in Australia, because I know there are other countries such as Pakistan and India where engineering is well understood and it's quite looked upon quite well by society. In Australia, we don't share that level of awareness, unfortunately, and that's where we'd like to get to. So we know that one of the things that we need to do is to be able to articulate what engineering is in a way that unites all those different types of engineers. And I'd love to hear, when we get to the question and answer section of this session, your thoughts on why engineering is perhaps enjoys greater awareness in the general community in some of your countries compared to Australia. How is it that engineering is so well known in the general community? So I will show you some more data. So the question we asked of all the women who didn't choose engineering, we asked, why did you never consider studying engineering? And there was a whole range of reasons given that they could select from. And you can see the one at the top there at 51% said that they didn't know enough about it or they'd never really thought about it. So that was the most commonly cited reason, but you can see the other reasons listed there. Again, not a surprise, but they really validated our hypotheses for why many women don't consider engineering. And it's largely comes down to didn't enjoy maths or physics. they thought it would be boring. A lot of people in Australia think engineers are train drivers or car mechanics, or they wear a hard hat and a high-vis vest all day. So there's real sort of stereotypes about what engineering is. So you can see the range of reasons there. A big factor in Australia, which I don't think is necessarily shared in the other Asia Pacific regions, is lack of awareness, or sorry, lack of interest in studying mathematics, which is a particular concern of mine. The research, however, also showed that of all the women who did choose engineering, those women love working as engineers, and I'm certainly one of those women. I have just absolutely loved being an engineer. I've been working for 30 years now. Some chapters of my working career have not been in technical engineering, but as we'll see later, I've always drawn on my engineering skill set and mindset. But it was really pleasing to see from the research that on the whole, female engineers really enjoyed their work. They found it fulfilling, rewarding. And when I talk to female engineers in Australia, they have a real sense of passion, and males, by the way. We all have a sense of passion about our profession because we know how it's contributing directly and positively to the world. It's very easy to see what the positive impact is. And in fact, I was talking to several hundred female high school students recently at an engineering careers day. And I was on a panel with some other female engineers. They were quite early in their career, and they were civil engineers working on tunnels and bridges. And they were so delighted that the engineered systems that they were working on were providing a means for people to get to essential services like schools and hospitals, and a means to get to family and friends. So they felt a real sense of achieving something and doing something that's positive for the world. So that is a message that we need to try and get out to female high school students and primary school students, as well as their teachers and parents and careers advisors, that as an engineer, there's a multitude of ways of contributing positively to the world and having really positive impact, and that it's a really rewarding and fulfilling career. And we found that our research showed that female engineers are as satisfied with their careers as females in the health profession. So that really sort of lovely feeling of doing something that's really good for society, which I think is important to men as well, but definitely in the data that it supports that as being a high priority for women, absolutely. However, not all women in Australia who are engineers stay working as engineers, and retention of women in the engineering workforce, so those who studied, graduated, worked as engineers, but then leave the engineering profession, that is a significant issue for us to look at as well. And 2/3 of the women who we surveyed who had left the engineering profession did so because they felt they had limited career opportunities, or that there were workplace culture issues. Now, for those of you who are not in Australia, this is a big issue in some sectors, particularly construction and infrastructure. It's an issue that's talked about a lot, and there's a lot of energy and effort being put into changing workplace culture, not just because of female engineers, but because of the whole workforce. So it's a significant problem, but there's a significant amount of effort being put into addressing it. But it's a good reminder, this data, that we shouldn't take our eye off this ball. It is still very much something that we need to address, and it won't change overnight, but we are moving in the right direction. The other key insight from this research that I found really interesting was that the data showed that female engineers have a disproportionately high rate of imposter syndrome compared to men, and also importantly compared to women in other fields. Now, imposter syndrome, in case that's not a term that you use in your countries, that is a term that we use in Australia to refer to a tendency to have a lack of confidence in your abilities and your achievements. So it manifests in that you're less likely to put your name forward for opportunities. You're less likely to take up opportunities presented to you because you think you're not quite good enough, or you're not quite ready enough, or perhaps you wouldn't be able to do a good enough job at it. So our data from the research showed that 1 in 2 female engineers have cited feeling like an imposter at work. compared with 1 in 3 male engineers, and importantly, 1 in 3 females in other fields. And certainly, this is something that I hear often anecdotally when I'm talking to female engineers. There's certainly, at the risk of generalizing, I certainly feel that anecdotally women do tend to experience a feeling of self-doubt, perhaps a little bit more than the men. And so that means in a workplace environment, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes women need a little bit of encouragement and support to get over that feeling of self-doubt. So that's something that was really interesting for us. So I would encourage you to have a look at the report that I mentioned. I can provide the slides if you didn't quite catch it, or just Google Engineers Australia Women in Engineering Research and it should pop up. It's full of really interesting data and insights. So I would encourage you to do that. We have also done other types of research, a lot of roundtables, a lot of informal conversations, so qualitative and quantitative data. And I have to say that for me, having worked on this project of the engineering workforce for nearly 2 years now, these are probably the 6 most important priorities that emerge from all of our research and analysis for me. So this is really getting to the point, what can engineering organisations do to really support female engineers and really encourage young female students to choose to study engineering? So here we go. These are the 6. And I've already mentioned the first one a lot, and that's because I think it's one of the most important, certainly in Australia. And that is, we need to raise awareness of what engineering is and what engineers do, but not just in a mechanistic way. We really need to make those positive messages really clear. The fact that many engineers love their careers, they find that very rewarding and very fulfilling. And the breadth of opportunities that an engineering career can offer. I often talk about it as a bit of a choose your own adventure, because really, once you've qualified as an engineer, your biggest challenge is working out what you're interested in, because whatever you're interested in, there's almost certainly an engineering career somewhere in that field. There are just so many different types of engineer, as I was talking about before. It's a wonderful career for international mobility. Organisations like the International Engineering Alliance have the agreements which support international mobility. Certainly in Australia, and I know other countries that would be represented here, it is a very secure job. Certainly in Australia at the moment, we have a huge shortage of engineers, so job security for the short to medium term is almost guaranteed. It's also a relatively well-paid career in most respects, so that's great. We also find in Australia that engineers are very employable elsewhere in the economy. In fact, it's one of the reasons that we have a shortage of engineers in Australia, because engineers go off and work in non-engineering roles. We have a very versatile skill set and mindset that includes problem solving, structured thinking, creativity, quantitative and analytical thinking, and not all other professions have those attributes embedded. And in fact, in Australia, the Australian government ran a survey of employers to understand which graduates from universities they most valued. And engineering graduates in Australia have topped that list for the last 2 years, and in the previous years came very close towards the top. So engineers, on the most part, are trained very well, and the skills that we train them in are highly valued and are highly versatile across the whole economy. So that's a good news story for studying engineering. I can't think of a reason not to study engineering, although we do know that, well, certainly in Australia anyway, it's quite a long and difficult degree to finish. But I guess that's part of the reward as well. Very rewarding being able to understand the world the way that an engineer does. So there are lots of good news messages that we need to share, not only with the students, but with their parents, careers advisors and teachers. But at Engineers Australia, we're really looking at lifting the awareness of what engineering is across the whole community, because as I said before, unfortunately, there isn't a high level of awareness in Australia. Number 2, and again, I don't think all countries would necessarily prioritise this in the same way that Australia would, but certainly in Australia, we do have some STEM education biases that start early in childhood, gender biases away from STEM for girls and towards STEM for the boys. It sounds archaic and quite old, but it still happens. I think there's a lot more awareness about this than there used to be, but there is still work to do. So we find that a lot of girls, as the previous chart showed, a lot of girls think that they're not good at maths and they don't like maths. And that's really unfortunate. So anything that we can do to change those perceptions is really important. And our research shows that this needs to start really early in the school years. It's too late to try and convince girls in sort of the second half of high school that maths is an inspiring and exciting subject to learn because they've made up their mind by then. In fact, some research has shown that girls in what we call primary school, the first half of school, so quite young, have already formed a view as to whether they're good at maths and as to whether they like maths. So we have to start in early childhood and encourage more young girls to be inspired by science and engineering and technology and maths. The third one that our research and all our conversations highlight is the importance of mentors and internships, and not just in our career, but in the university years. In Australia, our research showed that female university students feel a little outnumbered because it is still a male-dominated qualification, and that is one of the reasons that many of them choose to leave engineering study. They have mentioned that mentors from industry would be a really helpful solution to make them feeling a little bit more supported throughout their university years. It also offers some links back into industry, so it starts to help build their networks and even can lead to internships, which are really important in Australia. Not only does it tend to be a requirement to have an internship to complete your qualification, but internships offer two other benefits as well. First, the network and the links back into industry, which is very important. It retains engineers in the engineering workforce. If they've had work experience in the engineering workforce, they're more likely to stay. But also, it's work integrated learning. So by the time an engineering student graduates, they already have at least one experience in the engineering workforce, which of course provides them with work-ready skills. I personally did an internship at the end of my first, second, third and fourth year of university. So by the time that I graduated, I had 4 sets of work experience. And look, at the time it was hard because all my friends were off on beach holidays at Christmas time, which is what you do here in Australia. I was off sort of working. So it felt hard at the time, but by the time I graduated, I was really glad that I had done that because it stood me in good stead, I think, and I got to work in some really fascinating work environments. So I really valued that. So in Australia, whenever I'm talking to engineering industry, I'm always emphasizing the importance of internships. Very important for those 3 reasons, and mentors as well. Not only in the university years, but also at every stage of your career. I still have a mentor. I think mentors are important for both men and women in all stages of your career because there's always something to learn, I think. And always good to bounce ideas around and test ideas. It's very rare that you wouldn't get something useful from having a conversation with a mentor. So that's something that our research has emphasized. Number 4 is an inclusive culture throughout engineering education. And I think this is going to be particularly the case when women are a minority and feel outnumbered by the men. When I studied engineering, I was one of 4 girls in a cohort of 120. I was studying mechanical engineering, so typically low numbers of females, I think because mechanical engineering invokes images of perhaps dirty overalls or something, which the mechanical engineers amongst us tonight or today will know is not necessarily the case. It didn't worry me that I was, for the most part, it wasn't a concern for me that I was only one of 4 women. I got on really well with the men. and I guess I'm used to it now, having worked in male-dominated environments. But that's largely because I've also been very fortunate to work in very supportive and inclusive environments, which is not always the case. So I have been very fortunate. But it is important that an inclusive culture throughout engineering education is fostered, and whether that's mentors, extra tutorials that maybe cater for the girls only, just to provide a little bit of extra encouragement without the pressure, I suppose, of being in a minority. I think it's probably a good idea to ask the girls themselves, the students themselves, what would help them. Number 5 is an inclusive workplace culture in engineering workplaces. This is still very important. We still hear stories in Australia where PPE, protective personal equipment, the only PPE available is for men. So women have to wear men's-sized high-vis vests and men's, overalls and shirts and things, which don't fit very well and can in fact be a safety hazard. Flexible work arrangements are important for both women and men now, we know. So an inclusive workplace culture is important for all aspects of diversity, including women in engineering. This has been a focus for many of us for many years now, but we're not quite there yet. So this one still needs to stay on the list because there's still more work to do. And the 6th one is provision of opportunities and extra encouragement and support to overcome that sense of self-doubt or imposter syndrome. Now, this is a really important one for me and really resonates with my experience. As I mentioned, my career, I've been very fortunate to have worked in very supportive and inclusive environments where my supervisors and bosses have provided me numerous opportunities for me to try new things and to extend my capabilities and to develop new skills. And I remember many times throughout my career being quite terrified at the new opportunity, but the environment was so supportive that I felt reasonably comfortable in grasping that opportunity. I can think of 1 or 2 opportunities which I declined for various reasons, and I partially regret those decisions, but for the most part, I have grasped the opportunities that have been offered to me, and that can seem quite scary at times, because often you think, I haven't done that before, I don't know if I'd be good at it, what if I'm not good at it, what if something dreadful happens, what if that person over there is better than me? These are all those sorts of questions that run through your mind. So it's not only about the provision of opportunities, but that extra encouragement and support that might be needed for some women just to get over that hurdle of self-doubt. So for me, these are the 6 big themes that emerge from not only our quantitative research, but also the many conversations that I've been having with engineers throughout different career stages. I thought that I would move now on to some reflections about leadership, women in engineering and leadership in particular. And I'm going to draw on my own career. So I've had 5 main chapters of my career. I graduated from the University of Sydney in 1993, which is 30 years ago, which really dates me. I'm old. In some respects, it seems like yesterday. So for all the young people on the call today, make the most of every day because it goes very quickly. I actually didn't do engineering for the first chapter of my career. I went to a management consultancy, and we do actually lose a lot of our qualified engineers to non-engineering roles in banking and management consultancy. And ordinarily, we see that as a good thing, engineers working across the economy. But as I said, in Australia at the moment, we have a shortage of engineers. So we do like to keep engineers working in the engineering workforce for as long as we can. At the time in 1994 and 1995, the organisation was called Booz Allen and Hamilton, but it's now part of PwC, the arm called Strategy and I was working in institutional banking, finance of all things, which was very new to me. So I learnt a lot. But look, after nearly 2 years, I realised that it wasn't what I really wanted to do. And so I decided to leave that organisation and find a job as an engineer. So I really learnt from that chapter of my career that for me, it was important to do something that I enjoyed and that's something that interested me. So yeah, it was a short chapter in the scheme of things, but I learned a very important lesson. I was very fortunate for my next chapter of my career because there was an exciting project just starting in Australia. It was a NATO project, and Australia was a guest nation for the NATO project. And it was called Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile. And you can see a picture of it there. It's a supersonic ship self-defense system. And there were 10 countries all designing different parts of this system. Now, this system is something that you would launch to protect your ship if it was being attacked by an inbound threat. You would do some various things, and if they all failed, this is the thing that you would launch right at the last minute. I was the thermal design engineer, and I also did some performance modeling, coding in Fortran for those software engineers out there, if you can believe it. Yes, Fortran was being used and is still being used, and I loved coding in Fortran. But for most of my nearly 10 years on that project, I was the thermal design engineer for the thrust vector controller at the end, the aerodynamic control fins, and the long dorsal fins. And this for me was a formative chapter of my career. I was with BAE Systems for 14 years in total, but after the first 8 or 10 years, I worked on other things. But it was the first 8 years that was really the formative chapter of my career. I started effectively as an entry-level engineer. I had a little bit of a work experience elsewhere under my belt, but I was effectively a very junior engineer. And I was lucky because I got to design a system from a blank page through to the point where it was mature enough to be put into production, and then assembled and integrated onto the ships. And it was fantastic because I got to see what was involved in designing a very complex technological system. Lots of iteration, lots of test, lots of instrumentation, a lot of analytical work, looking at the data, looking at the modeling results, comparing test data with modeling, huge amounts of iteration. And the reason I find that this chapter very rewarding is because everything I learned in that chapter of my career, I have used almost every day since, but in a range of different contexts. So I'm really grateful for that chapter. I was working with incredibly supportive, male-dominated, but very supportive teams. And this is where, in particular, I was provided lots of opportunities just to keep extending my capabilities and skill sets. And as I said, I'm very grateful for that. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I decided that I probably didn't want to design weapon systems for the rest of my life. I had actually undertaken a master's in international relations part-time. And I was told about some jobs going in the department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And I applied for those jobs and was fortunate enough to get one of those jobs. Now, this was a period of my career where I wasn't working as a technical engineer, but actually I ended up bringing a lot of engineering method and technique into public policy. Now, this was a department with 500 odd people. There were only 2 engineers. So you can imagine lots of smart people, but from lots of different backgrounds: economics, law, social science, you name it, everything except engineering pretty much. So for the first 2 years, I went up a steep learning curve about how government works and how policy's made. And then after the first 2 years, I became a little frustrated because the way that we were going about grappling with these very complex public policy problems, such as water security, which is important in Australia, education policy, health policy, cybersecurity, national security, developing Northern Australia, and so forth. I felt that the methods we were using in the department would benefit greatly from some engineering techniques, generalized engineering techniques. So in my spare time, I began delivering seminars at lunchtime and things on engineering techniques, such as framing the problem, structured problem solving, causal loop diagramming, systems thinking, and so forth, in a very simple, plain English, non-technical way. And these were really popular. I was doing those for about 4 years, and then I decided, look, I think there's something really in this. I'm going to start up my own business and do this full time and teach generalized problem solving techniques heavily informed by engineering design and systems thinking to non-engineers. And so I spent 6 years refining an approach to complex problem solving over that time. Now, I was terrified. I didn't know whether my own business would work or not. In the end, it did, thankfully. So that was a real lesson. You know, give things a try. If it doesn't work out, you can go and get a job somewhere else or do something different. I was somewhat emboldened because the World Economic Forum around that time, in that period, issued a report that said complex problem solving was the single most important skill set we need this century. And I had come to exactly the same conclusion separately, having observed how we were collectively going about problem solving. So I was a bit emboldened, got a little bit of confidence from that. During those two chapters, I wasn't surrounded by engineers. I missed that. So the former chief engineer of BAE Systems actually had been working for Engineers Australia, and I called him one day and I said, I'm missing not being around engineers. How can I volunteer for Engineers Australia? So I began in about 2016 or 2017 volunteering for EA in various capacities over several years, and through a meeting with the CEO during one of those meetings, I found out the chief engineer's role was open. She encouraged me to apply, and 3 weeks later, here I was, and that was 2.5 years ago, and it's been a real privilege ever since, and it's been a very busy time. It almost seems like yesterday. So I guess the overarching theme here is that there's been no career plan. I've never really had a career plan. There've been, as you can see, lots of different twists and turns along the way. But what has been a theme is that I've always followed what's interested me and I guess what aligned with my values, which was contributing something positively to the world and achieving outcomes, whether it was in education or defense or policy or engineering. I was always keen to see really good outcomes from my work. And I think that's what is attractive about engineering. Compared to some other types of work, it's very clear what the outputs are, and it's very clear whether your work is effective or not, because often technological systems don't lie. We either know they're working or they're not. They don't mince words, so to speak. So over the last 30 years, and I'm now in a senior leadership role, how do I think of leadership? I think because the complex challenges that we're working on these days require so many different types of people to collaborate. Leadership for me is mainly about inspiring, guiding, and empowering people to achieve things. Inspiring is really important because we want people to do their best work, and they're going to do their best work when they really believe in what they're working on. And I love the bricklayer analogy for this. Imagine we've got a bricklayer. We can either tell the bricklayer, look, you're laying bricks. Or we can say to the bricklayer, actually, bricklayer, you're helping us build a wall. Or we can say to the bricklayer, look, your work is contributing to the building of a cathedral. Now, which one's more inspiring in that little story? So it's really important to let people know how their piece of work is contributing to this really important, bigger contextual outcome. Guiding, that's really important. We need to be able to guide teams, adjust course where needed, provide feedback where needed, but also empower them, encourage them to take initiative. Don't wait to be told what to do. Please take some initiative. If you can be creative or think we should be doing something different, please suggest that. But know when to seek guidance or to test ideas with others. So for me today, this is how I think of and define leadership. But of course, there's no single right definition. I'm almost coming to the end here. What makes a career fulfilling? Well, this is my view, but I've also seen similar models in the various literature around. I think if you can align these three considerations, you end up with a career that's fulfilling and rewarding. The first one is align your work with what interests you and what you care about. I think we've all heard the common saying, you know, if you enjoy your work, then you won't work a single day in your life. And it's so important to enjoy what you're doing. And if you're young, if you're early in your career or you don't yet know what interests you, start paying particular attention to what you keep thinking about and what you care about. And if there's a pattern there, that will certainly give you some good indications as to what you could align your career with. It's the orange circle there. That's obviously ideal. Focus your work on an unmet need or a gap. That means there's probably going to be a market for it. And of course, the last one, deliver valuable outcomes. That there is not just delivering high quality, which is the obvious one, that also requires persistence. You know, sometimes the good things aren't easy and they do take a bit of time. There'll be failures along the way that we can learn from, and we've just got to keep going. If we believe in what we're trying to achieve, we've got to keep going, and there'll be good days and bad days, and we've just got to be persistent. Insight is really important, and I'm going to linger on that just for a bit, although I know I'm running out of time, but I'm nearly at the end. The ability to contribute insight is one of the most important things that I think you can do. And for me, the ability to contribute insight comes down to being very observant throughout your whole career. So take notice. If there are students online, that is not too early. Start taking notice of what works, what doesn't, what other people do, what other people don't do, what's working well, what's not. Because if you're very observant and you learn along the way, just like that 30 years goes, and you've got this huge pool, this huge reservoir of observations and learnings that you can recombine into new combinations to solve new problems. So that would be a really big observation of mine over 30 years. The more you observe and learn, the more insight you'll be able to contribute. Communication is really important. I learned this quite late in my career, and I think it's so important now, again, because of that complexity point. We have to work with lots of different types of people, engineers and other people who are not engineers, who are from different professions, and we need to be able to have effective conversations. And of course, know what you're talking about. This is a relatively new light bulb moment for me. Things become a lot more easy for you if you know what you're talking about. If you want to be an expert in something, or you want more opportunities to come your way, it really helps if you know your subject matter inside out. And this is my last slide. I thought I'd finish with 8 pieces of advice I'd offer to my younger self for building a fulfilling career. And whether that ends up being ultimately a senior leadership role or leadership in some other capacity, because I think you have the capability to be a leader no matter what stage of career you're in, whether you're in early career, mid-career, or late career. There's the potential to lead, thought leadership, suggesting new ideas, taking a team on a new tangent because it's a better one. There's no shortage of leadership opportunities. So however you define a fulfilling career, these are what I would have suggested to my younger self. And I learned some of these early, I learned some of them later. And I've mentioned most of them, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly to leave some time for questions. Number 1, start noticing what interests you, what you think about a lot, and what you care about, because if you can align your work to that, that's great. 2, look for gaps and problems that need solving or opportunities to make things better, and try and join teams that are already working on them, or start a team and work on it yourself if there's no one doing it. And then that 3rd one, deliver valuable outcomes. Be prepared to work hard, because complex challenges require hard work, but that doesn't necessarily mean quantity over quality. Work-life balance is very important in this very busy day, very busy world. Our day-to-days are full of everything. Let's work hard while we're at work and maintain our physical and mental health while we're doing that. And that other point about contributing insight, talk to lots of people, read a lot, be observant and learn along the way, and then you'll have a bigger pool of observations to recombine later. Develop your communication skills at every opportunity, and more opportunities will come your way if you know what you're talking about. So be prepared to put the hard work in, understand what you're working on in a level of detail that makes your contribution very worthwhile. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. That's what I've learned over my 30 years. So I'm going to leave it there. You're very welcome to get in touch with me either via LinkedIn or via email if we don't get to your questions today, or if you've got any thoughts to share with me. I'm very happy to have a conversation with you over those mediums. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hand back for questions.
Thank you very much, Jane. This is so awesome and very inspiring. And we actually have some in our chat box. They also said that this is the right program at the right time. I think some of our audience probably is struggling by something, and by listening to your talk, it somehow inspired them too. And one of the questions we have in the chat box, if I understand it correctly, I think they want to know what can be inspired. I don't know, what can be inspire you to take a higher engineering level of education or something like that. Probably for those who want to pursue the careers or pursue the study in a higher engineering education. Do you have something that might help inspiring them?
Well, look, I think, technology is so complex these days, isn't it? And it's so exciting, but we're going to need a whole range of different types of engineers. We're going to need the generalists who are good communicators, who can bring the professions together and have the conversations and bring the technical perspective to those conversations. And we're also going to need the deep subject matter experts. So, for example, in Australia, we have a shortage of power systems engineers at the moment. We are crying out for grid connection engineers and power system engineers who both know about the old legacy systems, but also the new systems. And so there's a real market here at the moment for people with deep subject matter expertise in power systems engineering. So whether that's through a master's or a PhD or deep in industry experience. So I think if you've got an interest area, an area of practice, and you want to be a subject matter expert, then that for me, I think is a great reason. But of course also research.
Hello. Are you all hear me? Hi. Hi.
Hi, sorry, I think you lost me, or I lost you for a moment there. I'm back.
Okay, I thought I was lost. Okay. Okay, so can you somehow repeat the last few sentences?
Oh, sorry, did I cut out sooner? Sorry about that. Bad internet here, I apologize. Yes, I think my first point was about deep subject matter expertise in areas where we need it. And in Australia, one example is power systems engineering. But of course, the other example is research. And we know that technology is advancing in every direction and at a pace that we've never seen before. So we're also going to need deep subject matter experts to help keep the frontiers of that technology. Oh, I haven't lost you. I thought you'd lost me again. To keep those frontiers of technology advancing. So I think many good reasons to study a master's or PhD if becoming something.
Right.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I think that is a very good point for pursuing a higher degree. And I have one quite difficult question for you though. I, I very impressed by your research on like surveying both women and men in a field and also out of field of engineering about the factors that somehow affecting them, like to pursue the careers or they're studying in engineering field. So I would like to ask for a personal suggestion for me, as I am right now a chair of IEEE Women in Engineering Committee for this year, and I think this is very interesting research to do. As you mentioned before, that in Australia the context is different, and I
Yes.
also think that for another countries, especially where I live, Southeast Asia, probably different too. So
Yes.
if I want to start doing this kind of survey or research, I don't know, like where should I start? I think it will be very interesting to like gather all of this survey from like very many countries. And
Wouldn't that be fascinating? I agree. Well, I can share how we approached that in Australia. So we could have just gone out to our members and more broadly with our survey questions, but we chose to use a data analysis company who specialize in survey design. They actually used more sources of engineers than just our members. So we drew on well, male and female engineers who were both EA members and who weren't EA members. So we got a really sort of good, broad cross section of people. And look, it wasn't cheap. I have to say, I can't remember how much it cost, but we felt that it was worth the investment to get the insight, and that remains the case. We're very glad we did it. So look, I think there were just under 1,000 respondents in the survey. But look, I think there's different ways that you could do it for smaller budgets, depending on your membership and how many resources you put on the project. I'd be very happy to put you and anyone else in touch with the person at Engineers Australia who worked with that company on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure we can share the questions that we asked. Most of them are in the report anyway, but we'd be certainly happy to provide the questions that we asked for our survey, and that might be a useful starting point for you.
that would be great. Thank you very much. I can try, and we will see the result if it's like different or if it's the same as in Australia. Like
Yes, and I think you raise a good point. I think there would be quite some differences in many of the questions, but you're right, it would be fascinating to see
yes.
how it varies between countries.
Yeah, yeah. That would be interesting to do. Thank you very much. I will keep in touch with you later after this. And I'm trying to see what we have in the chat box. What about our panelists here? Do you have like any comments or any question do you want to ask our speaker today? Nishihara sensei?
Yeah, thank you. Well, can I ask some questions? Well, I didn't know that in Australia, the ratio of female engineers is still small, and female engineering students are still small too. The ratio is almost the same as in Japan. And you said lack of awareness is one important issue. And I think we have to give awareness to young people, but not only for young people, but also to their parents and teachers of high schools or junior high schools or even primary schools. And one thing I would like to stress is we need more voices from industry side saying that they need more women engineers so that they can make innovation. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, that's one of the strongest arguments, I think, for encouraging more women to become engineers, is the diversity of thinking. And there's a lot of data and research now to show that organizations are more innovative when they have diversity, and not just women, but diversity from many different angles. So I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that we agree also that it's not just targeting the young students, it's their families as well, teachers, careers advisors. I go and speak at the annual Careers Advisors Forum, for example. We speak to 300 of them a time, I think it is, let them know what engineering is. And one of the other initiatives that will kick off this year is encouraging all our members. We have 115,000 members. We're going to run a campaign to encourage all our members to have a conversation with someone who isn't an engineer about their work. And if we can encourage them to do that several times a year, that'll be hopefully thousands more conversations per year about engineering. And hopefully with a campaign like that over time, we'll start to lift the awareness more broadly in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Lance too.
Okay, thank you. Once again, thank you so much, Jen. Well, as I've mentioned before, I heard you before last year, and this year is equally, well, fantastic, and it's really inspiring as well. I understand that CSIRO have this STEM Professional in School program, and similarly in IEEE, we have some program encouraging STEM, like what we call it Try Engineering. So I wonder, is there something similar in EA, and whereby is there any way that we can cooperate working towards it? Because we know that one of the issues we're dealing with students is, well, there are a lot of policy and regulation required interacting with school children. So I wonder what is the EA's approach in this issue?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lance. That's a great question. We will have more to share with you around mid-year in the second half of this year. We are working on a lot of the issues that you've just mentioned. There are hundreds of STEM in schools programs in Australia, hundreds of government STEM in schools programs, and hundreds of privately run STEM in schools programs. And one of the challenges we've identified is that despite hundreds of STEM in schools programs, the proportion of women in Australia choosing to study engineering is still low. So there is an argument to be made that the ones in Australia don't seem to be working well enough to get girls over that threshold to make a decision to choose engineering. Many of them choose science, so I think we're doing well on the science front, but the E in STEM is we're not getting through. So there's a number of initiatives underway both within government, and I actually chaired a task force where we were looking at which STEM in schools programs actually are more effective. And some of that research has shown that the ones that start in early childhood and that are sustained through the years are the most effective compared to the ones which are just once-off programs for one day. That doesn't seem to be as effective as the ones that have several touch points throughout a girl's schooling. We are just mobilizing a big project right now to encourage our members to come into schools and give talks or do engineering demonstrations. But for the matters that you raise, such as the policies and other sorts of rules about who can come into schools and talk, we're navigating that at the moment. And we also, of course, are trying to understand who inspires young people, because it's not necessarily the older people like us or me who necessarily inspire the younger generation. Quite often they want to hear from even engineering students, so and people in their early careers. So we're trying to design the programs so that they really inspire, because not all programs work. As I said, we're early in that phase, and we'll have more to share in the second half of the year.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to hear from you, and also looking for the opportunity we can cooperate as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you.
So, and also besides the STEM program, we also have a question like similarly, but it's about HR practice organization. Like,
Yes.
what needs to be done to influence HR or people and culture policy? Can EE
Yes.
partner with HR best practices organizations or something?
Yes, that's an excellent question. We are certainly looking to do that. Engineers Australia has a new CEO, Romilly Maju, and she's very well connected into several HR, people and culture, diversity type organisations, such as Champions of Change, which champions gender diversity, and a number of others, which champion other lenses of diversity. I'm not, I can see Robert Wilson asked that. I'm not sure if that's the Robert Wilson I know or a different Robert Wilson. I suspect it is the one I know. Hello, Robert, if it is. I hope you're well. So we are partnering with those sorts of organisations, and depending on the sector, we're also partnering with other organisations. So for example, workplace culture is a particular challenge in the construction and infrastructure sector. And the Australian Constructors Association has, at the end of last year, released the Australian Culture Standard for the construction sector. So we're looking at partnering with the ACA to look at how we can promote that, strengthen that, and accelerate its uptake and the practice of that. So it's very high on our radar because it's seen as so important. And not just for women, I have to say. I'm certainly hearing anecdotes that a better culture for both genders, people of all identities. So it's something that's very much on our radar, yes.
Yes. So I hope that answered Robert Wilson's question. Also, this one is such a very interesting question. So what are the best support for women who want to pursue the careers in engineering, like scholarships, fellowships, internships, funding agencies, or something else?
Look, that's a great question. I think all of those things can help. I was fortunate enough to have a scholarship in engineering, which is one of the main reasons I was lucky enough to have 4 internships. So scholarships can definitely help, but I can't help but think that really we've got to build the pool earlier in the pipeline and really open the minds of our young girls and young men, but particularly girls, given we have so few female engineers in Australia. We have to open their minds as to how exciting and inspiring maths and science are to learn. You know, a lot of young Australians don't choose to study maths at an intermediate or advanced level. The rates of maths students are declining in Australia. And that's one half of the way we understand our world, isn't it? Qualitative versus quantitative, if we want to simplify it like that. So I really think that all those measures that were mentioned are really valuable, but I can't help but feel that we've got to start, you know, earlier in the pipeline and really start to inspire our young Australians, but young people, if this resonates in other countries, about, you know, the wonder of maths and science and the application of that through engineering.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And I think for this one, it will be our last questions and suggestion from Hideki Kawai. Very interesting, though. He said, I think we need someone who is a role model for engineering, such as Jobs,
Yes.
Elon, or Gates, something like that. What do you think?
Look, it's something we are definitely thinking about at Engineers Australia. And again, it ties back to who is going to inspire the younger generation and the older generations too, because we are losing a lot of engineers to non-engineering roles. So how can we inspire you know, generations of engineers? It could be, you know, someone who has worked in an engineering field. I'm certainly turning my mind to things in popular culture. For example, the Drive to Survive series about the Formula One. I'm really hoping they'll drop the word engineering more there. More TV shows about engineering. There's one that's airing in Australia at the moment that's called Baking Impossible, where they unite a baker and an engineer into teams and they have to design some sort of engineering feat that's also edible. I watched the first series of that with my son, and that was great. And we're actively considering producing a TV show at Engineers Australia for the broader community, again, to raise the awareness of engineering. I don't know if you've seen the latest Spider-Man film, but Spider-Man and his two best friends aspire to study engineering at MIT. I actually inquired with Marvel as to whether we could use that little snippet to help raise awareness, and unfortunately Marvel said no. But look, I can't agree more that having role models is so important. So it's something we're thinking about. We haven't quite landed on who that would be or how we might approach them to really sort of amplify their message and their presence and their visibility. But I certainly hope that we'll do that soon, because I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jane. This talk is very awesome, so inspiring, and it's just like in the best time, because this month is the International Women's Month, and it's during like International Women's Day, and we're so glad to have you with us today. And by the way, please give us your feedback through this QR code for those all in the panelists and also all the audience too. And stay tuned for our next webinar. IEEE standards for young professionals and students. We have innovation technologies for highly safe and energy sufficient GaN devices coming up next month. But before we say goodbye to Jane today, I would like to invite Professor Takako Hashimoto to give a closing remarks and also a word of thanks for our speaker today.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Jen, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It was really inspiring, impressive. And you started off by showing us the statistics of Australia's difficult situation. And I posted already in the chat box. Actually, I felt very close to you. So as Professor Akinori Nishihara mentioned, so we, Japan, also facing a similar difficult situation. We have similar challenges. So therefore, I agree with Kanita. So utilizing the advantage of IEEE, we are global organization. We can, if we could conduct the survey for collecting data, it would be great. Yeah, and we can have the different culture, different situations, so we can learn from them. And also, you showed us the benefits of being a female engineer and what we need to work on first. It is really important priorities. So I learned a lot. And I was also really impressed with your career development process. So your challenging spirit was especially very great. It is essential for being a successful women engineer, the leader. So thank you so much. And I am sure that today's talk was a really important learning experience for all the attendees. And I am so honored to have you, like you, to have a women leader role model like you. So I hope we can continue to work together and contribute to the society together to change the world. Okay, and we'd like to extend our appreciation for your presence and your wonderful talk by giving this e-momentum. Yeah, on behalf of Region 10, so I want to give you this e-momentum. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone, very much.
Thank you so
very
much.
Bye, Jen.
Okay.
Bye-bye. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, R10 Talk team, to make today happen. All of us here today. And please don't forget our next schedule for R10 Talks. And don't forget to give us feedback too. We'll have next interesting R10 Talk coming up. So stay tuned with us. Thank you all today. See you next talk. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
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 Everyone.